Director Matthew Vaughn has said in recent weeks that he thinks Deadpool 3 or Deadpool and Wolverine could be the movie that helps save the MCU because it obviously is dying for anyone who really is paying attention. And I know some people are going to argue with me on that one, but it is a fact that there has been reduced quality in MCU movies and the box office results reflect this much. But I don't think having a good movie like Deadpool 3, assuming it is going to be a good movie, will necessarily be enough to actually save the MCU unless they're going to address their overall problem with their movies. And that is they're spending too much money on their movies. And I know some people watching this are probably going to think that seems counterintuitive because presumably if you spend more money on a movie, then that means you can improve the quality of the movie, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case. And as an example, a lot of people always point out to Godzilla Minus One because that was a movie that was made on a low budget and it seems to be a movie that a lot of people enjoyed. And the director of Godzilla Minus One, Takashi Yamazaki, has said in recent interviews that just because they had a smaller budget than a lot of movies in the Western world have doesn't necessarily mean that they had to cut corners on luxuries for the cast and crew, as well as compromising the vision that they had for the movie. In fact, in a lot of ways, he's almost saying that having a reduced budget is a benefit for them because it forces them to kind of get back to the fundamentals of filmmaking in order to try to better maximize the amount of money that they do have to work with. When you compare that to a lot of Western studios, like what we're seeing with Marvel, where they're basically just doing whatever they can and then just throwing money at whatever problem arises and hoping that that would actually fix it in post, which we've seen time and time again that really doesn't work out for them. Superhero movies have become nothing more than actors in costumes standing in front of blue screens while the overwhelming majority of the film isn't completed until post-production VFX teams make the film look as presentable as they can in a short period. And a lot of the problems with this just has to do with the fact that they often come into the movie with an incomplete script where during these scenes in the movie, it's not that the CGI is bad and that's why the movie's bad. It's that they have the actors in front of green screens and blue screens because they don't know what the setting is of the movie at this time frame of the movie. They just figure like, we'll shoot the movie first and then just try to figure it out in the edit or whatever. So whatever we need to do, we can just green screen it in or blue screen it in. And that's not really a smart approach when you're doing something creative. You should actually have it understood. This is what's going to happen throughout the movie. At the bare minimum, have an outline of where the movie's going, but they don't actually do that. And that's why the quality of the movies have suffering as a result. Compare that to Godzilla Minus One, where they had a pretty strong vision of what they wanted to do with the movie before they even set out shooting it. Here's something that the director of Godzilla Minus One said when he was asked if he had advice for American studios on what they can actually do to improve the quality of their movies. If there was a solid vision throughout the process of making a single film, then I think there was a way to cut down on costs, he said. Yes, there are trial and error costs and bouncing ideas off each other is necessary to a certain extent, but if you can clearly communicate that vision, then maybe there is no need to do a lot of experimenting on the side that eats up a lot of cost and time. This article also says Godzilla Minus One director Takashi Yamazaki continues to pour salt in the wounds of Western filmmakers by not only sticking to his claim that the film only cost a total of $12 million, I think they meant the right $15 million, to produce, but that production was able to pull this off without having to cut corners on luxuries for the cast and crew on set of the movie. Some of the comforts and luxuries he's talking about aren't necessarily the most important things for the actual process of making a film, like renovating their offices to make them more comfortable or having a full-time sushi chef in the kitchen for them. Yeah, I mean, is that not an important part of the budget? Perhaps one can argue that, but at the same time, you need to keep the cast and crew comfortable and happy. So if that's what they felt was necessary, then fine. I mean, you can look at the results and it seemed to pay off for them because on a budget of around $15 million, according to the numbers here, they're able to make over $104 million globally. Compare that to something from the MCU, like the Marvel's their most recent movie. And you can see they spent nearly $300 million, $274 million according to this, but it's probably a little bit low estimate, but still, let's just assume that that's correct. Around $275 million they spent on it, and they've made so far less than $200 million globally. So not a good sign for them. But again, they took that approach where they could just, do whatever you want to do, and we'll just try to re-edit and reshoot and figure it out in post-production later. And that really wasn't the right approach for them to actually make with this. And not only was Godzilla Minus One able to keep their budget low as a result of their approach to filmmaking, but also they made a movie that audiences enjoyed too. I have the Rotten Tomato score pulled up for Godzilla Minus One. You can see it's universally praised with the 98% across the board for both critics and audiences. So this is a movie that people liked, and it was able to recoup its budget pretty easily because they kept their costs down. And some people might try to argue and defend a lot of Western studios by saying the only reason Godzilla Minus One had such a small budget was because they don't pay their VFX artists anything over in Japan. And I do admit, though, the VFX artists in Japan make less money than the ones working in VFX houses like in LA, for instance. But the funny thing is, if you compare the salary of a VFX artist working in Japan versus one working in a VFX house in LA, for instance, then you'll see that the quality of life for the VFX artists working in Japan is fairly comparable, if not slightly better, when you factor in the cost of living. So if you are a VFX artist, you may actually be better if you're one working in Japan. VFX aside, it is pretty well known that the budgets for these movies have been going too crazy. So Disney has actually been making moves to try to reduce them from future projects. Blade, for instance, is going to be the first MCU movie that's said to have a budget of less than $100 million. Does this mean they're going to get back to the fundamentals and actually try to adequately plan out their movies before they actually shoot it? That remains to be seen. I don't have a lot of confidence that they have that much competence at the studio level. I think what they're going to do is just try to cut their budgets down in order to try to mitigate their losses in the future. But I think the quality of the movie itself will actually remain the same. And it will be like that until they understand that you need to actually bring in more competent directors and writers and producers, people who will actually adequately spend the time in the pre-production phase of the movie to actually plan out things and get their story down before they start shooting 1 foot of film or 1 second of digital files for this. And once you do that, then yeah, you can have a better quality of film. But until you actually do that, you're going to see movies of diminished quality with maybe they'll be profitable because of reducing the budgets, but they won't necessarily be good. And having a hit like Deadpool 3 for them wouldn't be enough to actually revitalize the whole MCU. It'd be like what Guardians of the Galaxy 3 did. It was a good movie that people enjoyed, but you see the movies after that just fell off the cliff because one movie being good isn't going to be something that translates to the success of the overall franchise.